The role of your doctor in your application for benefits, helping you establish the date of disability, the cause of disability, and restrictions and limitations. Look, doctors didn't go to medical school to practice disability law. They don't like necessarily long-term disability claims, workers' comp claims, or Social Security claims, but they are key to getting your benefits. They need to complete forms because they're the key to the receipt of and continued payment of your disability benefits. So, as I've said before in other episodes, if your physician doesn't understand their role, there are three options. You can have an open discussion with your physician off the record about the requirements that you have to meet to be entitled to your benefits. Explain that once you get those benefits, you have an obligation to get regular and ongoing appropriate care. And in order to get paid, you need to be seeing them at least initially about every 8 to 12 weeks. You want your doctor to incorporate your activities of daily living forms into your chart notes and to document in the chart notes what they consider to be regular and appropriate care for your case. And I actually prefer that, or in addition to, that you give a good interval history to your physician between visits. I have a form called Symptoms and Functionality, and it reviews for the physician or summarizes for your physician the symptoms that you've had between visits with examples of how those symptoms have impacted your activities of daily living. So you might have difficulty standing in front of the sink, cooking or doing dishes. You might have difficulty lifting laundry that's over 10 pounds. You want to make sure that's documented in your records. Now, if the physician doesn't support your claim or is not cooperative, I have to tell you to go find a new doctor. That doctor that you're seeing might be the best doctor for the treatment of your condition. But if they don't support your claim, if they're not willing to cooperate, if they're not willing to document stuff, you've just killed your case. You need to really understand that if your doctor isn't supportive of your claim, your LTD claim, your Social Security claim, you're really putting your whole claim at risk. I don't want you to drop out of medical treatment either, even if your benefits have been denied or terminated. If your benefits are at issue, we're going to be filing an appeal saying that the decision was wrong. And by the way, you continue to be disabled because you're continuing to get medical care. And if the carrier reinstates your benefits, but then sees you're not getting ongoing care, they're going to do the same game again. And they're going to say, hey, you're not getting regular care as required by the policy. And so even though you might be disabled, you don't meet the proof standard. So we're going to deny your benefits. So when you apply for your claim, there are three things that we want to be talking about. What's the date of disability? Now that could be pretty obvious. If you've been in an auto accident, you know the day that you were injured. But if you're having ongoing medical problems and you're working while you're disabled, it's important that you are working with your physician to pick the right date to stop work. That can be a crucial date because if you're working and you're having trouble and you get terminated, the carrier is going to say, too bad, so sad, you didn't have coverage on the date that you stopped working because you were terminated because you had problems and they terminated you for performance and you were earning what you were making. So there's no lost wages. If you can smell that coming, you want to get your doctor to take you out of work because being a hero can result in you getting no benefits. The next thing that's important is the basis of disability. You want your doctor to document the objective basis of the diagnosis and the objective basis of the restrictions and limitations. Now, you've heard me use that word objective. You didn't hear that in any of the proof of claim provision forms that I've talked about earlier. But the reality is that your claim is going to be denied if there isn't any objective medical evidence to establish the basis of the diagnosis. So that might be lab reports, x-rays, MRIs, CT scans, surgical reports, EEGs, cardiac or stress tests, any other medical testing you have that shows that you have the disease that your physician has diagnosed you with. Now, I know that can be problematic in conditions where there's no known test or objective data available. Your physician might have to make a clinical diagnosis based on your physical examination. And that might be in the situation of a Lyme disease case, fibromyalgia, RSD, depression, MS, pseudo-seizures, all sorts of diseases that in their initial stages don't necessarily present with objective findings on diagnostic testing. Now, while carriers might ultimately accept your conditions, such as Lyme disease or fibromyalgia, as a diagnosis, they just may pay those benefits on a self-reported limitation provision of 24 months. And you need to be aware of that again in your policy. But again, the medical evidence is crucial as it relates to your restrictions and limitations. So the carrier might say, look, I agree there's no objective diagnostic testing for fibromyalgia, but we do expect that there are objective findings or a reason for those restrictions and limitations. And the courts will support them. The courts say, okay, we get it. There are some medical conditions where there's just no objective testing. But we do expect that there be an objective basis for the restrictions and limitations. That's crucial, particularly if you are having problems with multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, Lyme disease. There are 2 ways we can go about this, maybe 3 ways. We can get a functional capacity evaluation if your physician isn't willing to address your restrictions and limitations or explain them. We can get CPET testing, which will document the exhaustion and fatigue that results in these conditions, and it can cause restrictions and limitations. And we can also, if necessary, get our own independent medical evaluation that will provide a physical basis, an organic basis or explanation for the assigned restrictions and limitations. You can see that restrictions and limitations aren't defined in the terms of your policy, but restrictions are considered to be those physical or mental activities that you can't do because of your physical or mental impairment. So, for example, if you have a herniated disc, you might be restricted from lifting more than a half a gallon of milk. Now, on the other hand, you might have what's called non-exertional restrictions and limitations, which is the need, for example, to alternate sitting and standing, or to have to take breaks, or to elevate your legs. These, again, also have to be objectively diagnosed. And what you'll see in policy language is something like this. A condition in and of itself doesn't necessarily equal disability, and conditions may improve, stabilize, or worsen over time. Therefore, our ongoing consideration of your claim includes updated medical information, reviews relevant and appropriate, including the right to an independent medical evaluation. So that's their language to deny claims on the basis that your diagnosis doesn't equal impairment, or that the restrictions and limitations aren't objectively based and they don't equal impairment. Now, disability companies use certain defense doctors who I call liar for hires, but there's also a company that has developed disability duration guidelines. You need to understand that they don't incorporate that in the disability policy, but they use these rigid and inflexible guidelines to say, oh, you've had a herniated disc, you've had surgery, according to our guide, you should be back to work in 6 months. And so if that's happening, again, you want to be using a functional capacity evaluation or an IME to establish the extent and nature of your restrictions and limitations. Now, again, there's got to be this causal relationship between the diagnosis and the restrictions and limitations and the inability to do your own occupation, because you can have a diagnosis, but that doesn't mean that you can't do your own occupation. Just think about the number of NFL football players who are out there with herniated discs still playing football. So we've got to connect the disability diagnosis and the restrictions and limitations to your inability to do your own occupation if we're at the own occupation stage. And one of the ways to do that, of course, is to obtain what's called a vocational evaluation opinion. A vocational evaluator is an expert in the world of work, and they understand what the restrictions and limitations are. They understand what the occupational duties are, and they can say, hey, I've reviewed the medical records, I've reviewed the activity of daily living form, I reviewed the client's occupational description form and the employer's description of the occupation. I don't think that the applicant can do the material and substantial duties of the occupation, including these duties, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is why from a vocational standpoint, I don't think that they can do these duties. So the vocational evaluator can tie together the diagnosis and the restrictions and limitations to show that you're unable to perform the material and substantial duties of your own occupation. Once again, you can see there's a lot of thought and effort that goes into putting together a winning application. It starts with a review of the policy. It starts by understanding what's in your medical records, or what needs to be in your medical records. And it really involves an analysis of what's there, what needs to be developed or proven to submit a winning application. And of course, putting together that shock and awe application package that gives the carrier no reason to doubt your claim, no reason to contest your claim, and every reason to issue a check to you and send it to you as quickly as possible. All right, that's a wrap. If you like this podcast, consider liking our page, leaving a review, or sharing it with your friends and family. This podcast comes out weekly, so tune in next week for another episode of Winning Isn't Easy.